The Palatinate Forest, sometimes also called the Palatine Forest, is a low mountain region in southwestern Germany, located in the Palatinate in the state of Rhineland-Palatinate. The forest is a designated nature park covering 1,771 square kilometers, and its highest elevation is the Kalmit. Together with the northern part of the adjacent Vosges Mountains in France, it forms the UNESCO-designated Palatinate Forest North Vosges Biosphere Reserve, one of the biggest forests in Europe. Geography. Topography. The Palatinate Forest, together with the Vosges south of the French border, from which it has no morphological separation, is part of a single central upland region of about 8,000 square kilometers in area, that runs from the Borstadt Basin to the Burgundian Gate, and which forms the western boundary of the Upper Rhine Plain. This landscape forms, in turn, the eastern part of the very extensive eastern scarplands of France, which, on German soil, take in large parts of the Palatinate and the Saarland, with older and younger strata. Boundaries. The low mountain range of the Palatinate Forest is continued northward by the extensive hilly landscape of the North Palatine uplands, whose highest point is the volcanic Donnersberg. In the south it is continued by the northern part of the Vosges Mountains in France. The eastern end of the forest is adjacent to the Palatinate wine-growing region. Here the German wine route stretches through the undulating area that lies between the Palatinate Forest and the Upper Rhine Valley. The hill country between the Hartin Mountains and the Upper Rhine Plain, where Palatine wine is grown, is known as the Weinstraße. The German wine road runs through this area. West of Kaiserslautern is the marshy lowland of Landstuhl. Structure. The Palatinate Forest can be divided into three areas. The northern Palatinate Forest, bounded by the extensive northern Palatine hill landscape and reaching southwards to a line from Kaiserslautern to Bad Dürkheim. The middle Palatinate Forest from the stream Eisenach and the line Kaiserslautern, Bad Dürkheim to the Queek stream, and the line from Pirmasens to Landau. The southern Palatinate Forest, the so-called Wasgau, for the Queek stream, and the line from Pirmasens to Landau to the French borderline in the south. Subdivisions. The Palatinate Forest is a major natural region within the Palatine Saarland scarplands and runs south as far as the Col de Savin, i.e., far into French territory, where it continues as the Vosges Ridge. This often goes unrecognized as a result of the French border, hence the French southern part of the natural region is often wrongly counted as part of the North Vosges. The important subdivisions of these Bunter sandstone mountains were drawn up in the 1950s and 1960s in the Handbook of the Natural Region Divisions of Germany and 1 to 200,000 mapsheets by the German Federal Institute for Regional Studies. Despite that, some deviation in the names used by the handbook has prevailed. The most important subordinate landscapes listed with the aid of a map, the map only showing the names of well-known landscapes and only the more significant landscape boundaries. Palatinate Forest, Lower Palatinate Forest, Otterberg Forest, Stumpfwald, Quietersburg, eastern outskirts of Kaiserslautern, Central Palatinate Forest, Diemerstein Forest, Leininger Sporn, High Palatinate Forest, Hart Wasgau, Western Wasgau, Bitch Forest, Lowland Darnanweiler Felsenland, Sturzelbronn, Schonau Felsenland, Dana Felsenland, Dana Felsenland in the narrower sense, Anweiler Felsenland, Anweiler Albersweiler outskirts, Eastern Wasgau, Upper Mundat Forest, Hochwald Lembach Graben, Southern Wasgau. History. Name. The name Pfalzerwald was first used in 1843 when the Palatinate was part of the Kingdom of Bavaria by foresters in the centrally located municipality of Johanniskreuz, who used it to refer to the woods of the Bunter sandstone region. region of the Palatinate. Its use was extended when, in 1902, the Palatinate Forest Club was founded. Fritz Claus, one of the pioneers of the PWV in particular, strove to promote the name. A more precise, scientifically based definition of the Palatinate Forest as an independent natural region was introduced in 1911 by Daniel Habel, a Palatine geographer and local historian. Prior to 1850, there was no overall name for the Palatine's Bunter Sandstone Mountains. Historical territorial factors, rather than geographical ones, governed perceptions at the time. By contrast, the Celts and Romans viewed the entire mountain range west of the Rhine as a single unit, making no distinction between different parts of the region that, today, is the Palatinate Forest and the Vosges. The range was named after the Celtic forest god Vosges and is recorded in many Roman manuscripts as Silva Vosges or Mons Vosges. It was from this linguistic root that, during the Middle Ages, the name Vosges emerged in the French-speaking area and Vosgen or Vosgenwald, later also Vosgau, in the German-speaking region. So while the term Vosgen continued, for a long time, to refer to the entire range on the west bank of the Rhine, at the beginning of the 20th century, it gradually became restricted to the Alsatian part of the Sandstone Mountains, whilst the term Pfalzerwald became increasingly used to refer to the Palatine part. This led to the Palatinate Forest and Vosges being defined as separate and distinct landscapes. However, in recent decades, in the context of European integration, there has been an increasing trend to regard the entire mountain complex as a single geographical entity again. Evidence of this changed attitude can be seen, for example, in the establishment in 1998 of the first cross-border Biosphere Reserve, the Palatinate Forest North Vosges Biosphere Reserve by UNESCO. History of settlement. Traces of activity. Whilst there are traces of human activities in the more habitable regions of what is now the Palatinate, taking place since the Neolithic period, and especially in Celtic and Roman times, the mountains on the west bank of the Rhine were practically uninhabited and covered by dense, ancient forest until the end of the migration period. Abbeys, colonization and development after the Frankish conquests in the early Middle Ages took them to the edges of today's Palatinate Forest. There was increasing population pressure in the Middle Ages, especially through the initiatives of the nobility and the church, e.g., through the establishment of monasteries such as the Cistercian abbeys of Otterberg in Userthal, the colonization and development of the mountains. Areas that could be used for agriculture were cleared and settled permanently. This development reached its peak in the region during the era of the Salian and Hohenstaufen emperors, with the construction of Trifels Castle and other castles in the surrounding area that, for a time, made it the center of power of the empire. Abandoned villages, overexploitation and depletion. This development took place in the late Middle Ages and early modern period, because disease and famine led to a significant decline in population and the total number of settlements fell sharply, as a result of wars and economic circumstances. Thus, during the colonization of the mountains, areas were often cleared that, because of the nutrient-poor sandy soils, were unsuitable for farming and had to be abandoned after a short period because of overuse and overexploitation. Also, the use of the forest to obtain firewood and timber did not follow the principles of sustainability. On the one hand, the production of straw and wood pasture damaged the soils and forests. On the other hand, the manufacture of iron, glass and potash, which needed a lot of wood, led for centuries to the overuse and destruction of the forest and thus to the further impoverishment of the population. Occupations that the forest itself supported, such as lumberjacks, charcoal burners, rafters, resin burners and ash burners, supported only a meager existence. Immigration, re-impoverishment, first commuters after large population losses during the 30 Years' War. The population was initially restored and stabilized in the late 17th century, initially as a result of settler migration from the Tyrol and Swabia and the settlement of Huguenot and Mennonite religious refugees from Switzerland, France and the Netherlands. For then to the end of the 18th century, the population expanded as a result of the better design of farms and the expansion of villages. This development, however, meant that the resources of the mountains were rapidly exhausted and overpopulation and poverty, in particular in the 19th century, led to increased emigration to the New World. Apart from the modest level of iron extraction and processing work in the forests and the operation of paper mills, the shoemaking industry in the region Pirmasens was the only real source of income. This meant that the railway in the second half of the 19th century brought some improvement in the situation, because it became possible to commute to towns outside the Palatinate Forest and seek employment in one of the emerging industries outside the region. Deindustrialization and tourism in the 20th century. The general economic structural changes in Germany also affected the region of the Palatinate Forest, which was increasingly integrated into the overall economic and transport systems. Secluded forest farming villages became municipalities with a service character through the building of infrastructure, and, in many cases, the villages now no longer worked locally, but in more distant regional centers, such as Ludwigshafen and Kaiserslautern. By contrast, local industries in the mountains became rarer workloads, as can be seen in the example of the footwear industry. Since its heyday in the 1950s and 1960s, globalization has seen the relocation of shoe production abroad, resulting in the almost total collapse of the industry, reinforced especially in the 1980s and 1990s by increasing unemployment and induced migration trends. In addition, the far-reaching demographic changes of the last few decades have caused further structural problems, especially affecting remote communities in sparsely populated areas through population decline, aging and migration. At the same time, the forested highlands has gained increasing importance in the second half of the 20th century as a place for recreation and leisure activities of special ecological status. This is reflected in various touristic concepts and activities to offer the native population additional work and income opportunities and to assist in counteracting the structural changes described above. Nature Park and Biosphere Reserve. Whereas the Palatinate Forest was earlier seen mainly as a source of raw materials and energy supply, today, in addition to its recreation and leisure function, its ecological importance as a special protected landscape has come to the forefront. This change in attitude found visible expression inter alia through the establishment of the Palatinate Forest Nature Park and, later, the Palatinate Forest North Vosges Biosphere Reserve. Nature Park. The Palatinate Forest Nature Park was created in 1958 as the third nature park in Germany, in accordance with the requirements of the originator of the nature park concept, Alfred Topfer. The Palatinate Forest was to be a place of recreation and exercise for the stressed office workers of the cities in the Rhine Valley which were then suffering badly from air pollution. The Nature Park expansion program envisaged 95 car parks, 13 campsites, 7 observation towers and 5 open-air pools. In fact, 62 woodland car parks were created in the first 7 years, as well as 530 benches and as many waste bins. A total of 370 kilometers of walking routes were added or created and 145 signed circular walks laid out. The management of the nature park took over the Palatinate Forest Club. The 20 open shelters built for walkers in log house style were named Fisher Huts after the managing director of the Palatinate Forest Club, Ludwig Fischer. In the mid-1960s, the PWV came to the conclusion that the work required could not be done by volunteers and handed the management of the nature park to the Palatinate provincial government. By 1974, €3.7 million had been spent on improving recreational opportunities. Around 1975, the expansion of recreational facilities was viewed as complete and attention switched to the care of biotopes and the landscape in the center. Increasingly, there was also a desire to replace the many coniferous monocultures planted as a result of war, wartime reparations and times of crisis, with species-rich site-specific mixed forests. On the 20th of July 1982, the Palatinate Forest Nature Park Association was founded as a support organization. The members of the association of those counties and independent towns whose territories are covered by the nature park, as well as the Palatinate Regional Association, various rambling and sports clubs and environmental organizations. Many social organizations are involved in the work of the nature park, ensuring the independence of academic and regional individual interests. The association's goal is to develop the nature park and its eponymous Biosphere Reserve equally, and to maintain its uniqueness and beauty as well as its national recreational value. Since 1997, the head office of the association has been in Lambrecht. Biosphere Reserve. The Palatinate Forest Nature Park was recognized in 1992 by UNESCO as a Biosphere Reserve. In 1998 it became the German part of the first cross-border UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, namely the Palatinate Forest North Vosges Biosphere Reserve. It thus became the 12th of 15 German biosphere reserves. These are areas that have a special significance for the global conservation of biological diversity and in which the ecological aspects, sustainable economic management, environmental education and environmental research are best linked together. In 2007, the state of Rhineland-Palatinate issued an ordinance by which the UNESCO guidelines from the design of biosphere reserves would be implemented, specifically for the Palatinate Forest Nature Park. This laid down a zoning scheme as its main focus, which envisaged 3 zones with different objectives and protection functions. Core areas: securely protected sites for conserving biological diversity where there is at least possible influence on the course of natural processes, i.e., complete protection of typical ecosystems is ensured. Buffer zones: the buffer zones are used for ecologically sound farming practices that conserve landscape character. They are intended to complement and link the core areas. Transition areas: the main focus is on the promotion of model projects for sustainability that, for example, may include the development of sustainable tourism concepts or the environmentally friendly production of regional products. The quiet zones, also covered in the law, are intended to ensure recreation in the stillness, but are not part of the UNESCO guidelines for biosphere reserves. The concept originates rather from the old protected area regulation for the Palatinate Forest Nature Park and therefore overlaps with the other 3 zones. Core, buffer and transition zones are representatively distributed over the area of the Biosphere Reserve. As part of this, some 16 core zones were defined, together covering about 2.3% of the area, the source region of the Wieslade being the largest of the core area in the Biosphere Reserve, with its mixed stands of primeval beech, oak and pine. Geology: The Palatinate Forest is primarily characterized by a block of Bunter sandstone and its underlying formations of zechstein. The tectonically formed bedding of these rock types and the subsequent erosion led to the topography of this low mountain range that we see today. Development history. Formation of the Bunter sandstone. In the Permian geological period, the first sandstone formations, some 100 meters thick, were deposited in the area of today's Palatinate Forest. In particular, the rock units of the Rotliegends and the zechstein are important. At the beginning of the Germanic Triassic, i.e., from the Lower to the beginning of the Middle Triassic, there was a desert-like climate, so that as a result of further depositions of sand, rock layers of up to 500 meters thickness were formed. This led inter alia, through the addition of iron oxide, to a variable coloration of the rock strata, hence the name Bunter sandstone, and, depending on the type and binding of the material, to the formation of rock layers of different hardness. This resulted in the subgroups of lower, middle and upper Bunter sandstone. These Bunter sandstone formations were buried by various types of sediments in the adjacent sections of Muschelkalk and Keuper, and also during the Jurassic and Cretaceous. Laying down of the Bunter sandstone at the beginning of the Paleogene period of the Cenozoic era, the formation of the Alps led to considerable tensions in the Earth's crust, which, in the fallens to the north of the Alps, caused a bulge in the mantle and crust. At the apex of the arch so formed, there were considerable tensile stresses, so that the rock layers were stretched, and about 35 million years ago, deep cracks and depressions in the Earth's crust occurred. At the same time, the sides of the newly created lowlands were uplifted, in the case of the Palatinate Forest, to a height of about 1,000 meters. These processes, which continue today, have had four important implications for the present landscape of the low mountain region. The removal of approximately 800 meters of surface rock, thus exposing the Bunter sandstone. The tilting of the sandstone layers, the formation of swells and troughs, the breaking the Bunter sandstone into individual fault blocks and the formation of faults, shaping of today's landscape in the later Paleogene and Neogene, and also in the Quaternary period erosion processes once more dominated. In particular, it was the weathering and removal processes that occurred during the various cold and warm periods that determined the final topographical shape of the Palatinate Forest. Characteristic of this is a system of deeply incised valleys, especially in the north and center, diverse mountain shapes and bizarre rock formations. Structure. Bedrock gneisses and slates form the bedrock of the Palatinate Forest today, but they are generally covered by younger rock formations, cropping out only in a few places on the eastern edge of the mountains. Rotliegends and zechstein formations. These rock strata cover the bedrock and consist, in addition to sandstone, of shale and marl. They generally have a softer consistency and therefore form broad valleys and erosion surfaces in the northern Palatinate Forest as well as in the southeast. The southern Palatinate sandstone formations of the zechstein are divided into four strata having a total thickness of about 80 to 100 meters. Bunter sandstone beds. The rock unit of Bunter sandstone is divided into three strata. Lower Bunter. The lower Bunter is the typical rock of the Palatine Forest and covers large areas of the low mountain range to a depth of 280 to 380 meters. The sandstones contain much quartz and little feldspar and mica, so that they weather into sandy soils, poor in nutrients that are scarcely used for agricultural purposes. In all there are three subdivisions, the Trifels, Rehberg and Schlossberg beds, in which several rock zones of differing thickness are combined. Middle Bunter. In the Middle Bunter, various rock zones with thicknesses of about 80 80 to 100 meters may be identified. The most striking are the karst beds, which mainly occur at the surface as silicified blocks of rock, and the upper rock zone and the primary conglomerate, which also consist of silicified coarse sandstones and scree. At the top of this formation is the violet boundary layer, which mainly consists of fine, mica-rich sediments. Upper Bunter intermediate beds and Voltzian sandstone together form the Upper Bunter with a thickness of about 100 meters. Unlike the lower and middle Bunter beds, these strata contain more mica, carbonates and clay minerals, and thus weather down to soils rich in nutrients that are used for agriculture in island clearings in the western Palatine Forest.